gratitude. And I think values help us reinforce gratitude. Because we say like, oh, well, at least I've got this.
Yeah.
Relative to this person or this group of people not having this, which I think is misguided.
Welcome to the Enso Project. This is a podcast for people engaging in the never-ending process of expansion and growth. So the purpose of this podcast is to expand and grow through awareness, introspection, and stillness. We fundamentally understand that relative to all there is to know, we know relatively nothing. So with this in mind, we will consider and reconsider interesting perspectives, ideologies, and strategies for the purpose of self-actualization. Josiah, what's shaking, my friend?
Man, what's shaking? Core values.
Core values
I think that's
are
what we're
shaking
going to
today.
be. Yeah, we're going to be shaking that core value tree pretty hard.
As hard as we can.
Yes.
Yeah.
May even get a couple of kicks in. Only at the base. We'll see what happens.
Let's do it. So, first question is a question that I'm going to ask you and then answer myself.
Okay.
And that's, why are we talking about core values today? So, if you don't mind, I'll take this one.
Yeah, take it. Go ahead.
I think that the world might benefit from more people having more conversations around core values. And I'm not trying to evangelize or proselytize right now, but I do just want to draw awareness to, like, how do we make decisions? We consider parameters, we consider consequences, but really our behavior, in my view, and maybe this is claiming to know a little bit too much. It's not in the spirit of this podcast, but I'm going to go forward with it anyways and just say that I suspect that our behavior is simply the manifestation of our internal values in some way, shape, or form. And I don't have a quick and witty example to share about how this is the case, but I bet we could come up with one throughout the course of our conversation. And I think a good starting point for this may be, perhaps, what is the impact of not knowing what our values are? When you shake that values tree as hard as you can and you get no values falling to the ground. What do you think?
The impact of not knowing?
Yeah.
Well, I think I don't know if there may be no impact at all.
Really?
It may be the most prodigious impact. But I think all values, are a response to conditions at a certain point in time.
Mm-hmm.
Even values that we believe we inherit. So I think it really, when someone doesn't really have values, they maybe haven't been through enough conditions where they will want a certain set of preferences.
And do you think that that's possible for somebody to not have values?
Yeah, I do. I think the more prosperous we become, the easier things are for us as a society. I think we're going to probably not have as many values.
Just following
I can expound on that if I need to.
Does scarcity create the conditions for forming values?
I think.
I mean, it can, obviously, but is it the primary driver?
We also have to think about what the primary driver of scarcity is.
Mm-hmm.
Survival.
Right. Yeah.
So if I deem something necessary for my survival, I'm going to do what? Value it more.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So I do think people that live and operate in scarcity have more values than people who don't. We see this. They have more religious values. They have more. There are more scripts, right, that they adhere to. So I think, I'm not saying that it's aligned or tied to. I just think there's a correlation.
Yeah.
And so, I think the impact is when someone discovers that they don't have values in comparison to maybe someone who does, there does need to be some sort of introspection that happens to then try to figure out why that may be the case.
Okay, so this might be helpful for us to just create greater clarity, but I'm going to go ahead and adopt the position, which I'm not tied to, but I'm going to take it on for now, that that you can have values in the absence of scarcity, and that perhaps there is not necessarily the relationship there that we're assuming. Okay, does that sound fair?
Oh, yes. Not saying I agree. Values aren't absent, right, if you are prosperous.
So a conversation that I have pretty much almost every day is, what do you want to be when you grow up? I work with professionals, help them, realign their career towards something that they're better suited for. And I think that the answer to that question is almost entirely dependent on their values. And those values can be in alignment with survival. Like, how do I provide for myself? How do I provide for my family? And they might value a higher paying job because of that. But there's also the inverse. There are people who value things that don't necessarily improve their odds of surviving. We have self-sacrificing values. Why in the world would people do that? It's definitely not in alignment with survival, but they clearly have placed a value so great on that self-sacrificial act that they choose to deny survival.
Like self-sacrificing as in like a martyr?
Yeah, think of a martyr.
So if I'm I don't know, John the Baptist, and I get my head cut off because I believe I'm going to join, be at the right side of Jesus Christ for all eternity, I value that more than I do, right? So it may seem that it's self-sacrificing, but it's really self-preservation.
Right.
In the end.
That makes more sense. So it's really just, it's optimization.
Which is what? Survival. It is actually proficient survival. It is so proficient that we're getting the full utility out of everything that we have, if we're talking about optimization.
Right. I'm thinking optimization, I guess optimization can mean a bunch of different things, but the way that I'm seeing it right now is optimizing for quality of life, right? Your experience.
Yeah.
Which is definitely in agreement with survival, right? You have to survive first in order to have a positive experience, at least in this body, right? So that could make sense. But I'm really, can you think of any other situations where people prioritize, they value things that don't necessarily protect them?
Don't protect them in a physical sense, right?
Yeah, or in any sense, really. I'm thinking, we do things all the time that don't benefit us.
Right.
We do things that...
They're maladaptive.
Yeah, they're maladaptive. It's self-sabotage.
Man, even that, we're trying to protect some sort of emotional vulnerability.
Right.
Right? It's something that is in our best interest, but we don't do it. Or we, do the exact opposite. And it's from the observer's perspective, it's well, you need that, bro. Why are you, So, but that person is obviously trying to protect something, right? So that we just can't see. That's what a lot of research shows. That's what just my basic experience as being a human being I've done. Right?
Yeah.
I look back at certain decisions that I've made, and I'm like, that didn't make any sense. That was, the exact opposite of what I needed to do in that situation, and I was just protecting my own insecurity or
Yeah.
whatever it was. So, but I'm trying to think, are there examples where we're not trying to protect something?
You know, as I'm thinking through this question, I'm thinking like we're protecting ourselves from fear. We're protecting ourselves from some kind of negative emotion.
I think we're protecting ourselves from the fear of loss.
Yeah, that's definitely a very negative emotion. Yeah, grief.
But I think it's, I mean, if we go like several layers deeper, it could also be the fear of non-existence. I don't think we're afraid of dying. You know, I don't think we're afraid of not being, relevant. I do think we're afraid of the most uncertain thing that there is, which is the inverse of existence.
Right.
We don't know what
Right.
that is. We have all these things, we're not even
Theories.
like, there's like, theories about the afterlife. That still isn't non-existence. That is
Right.
existence
That's
in another
existence.
form.
Yeah.
But no one's ever been able to really articulate and help us understand nothingness. I mean, non-existence. And if you think about it, like you say, we kick that tree and we find out that there's no values, right, for some people. Well, that's a person who's living with, like, they're barely existing, like, if you think about it, because values help us create like narratives for existence. They help us navigate existence.
Right.
You know?
They're inherently evaluations of our environment. So to have a value, something has to be good and something has to be bad.
Right.
Which, you know, if we listen to Shakespeare, nothing's good or bad, but thinking makes it so.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this whole situation is just silly.
Now we're headed down the path I wanted to go towards,
Right.
which is all values are they're derived.
Mm-hmm.
I think they are their opinions at some point in their inception. They are opinions of existence. We had to become conscious of our existence.
Mm-hmm.
Then we had to formulate opinions of that existence based on certain conditions that we existed in.
Right.
Aliens come down to Earth, start walking around doing their thing. We're going to reevaluate our existence,
Right.
and therefore our values. Same thing with any major change that our societies go through.
It shakes us up. It causes us to reevaluate what really matters.
Yeah, I mean, we are living someone else's values right now.
Right.
This wasn't very high on the value hierarchy. I say this, you and I doing this podcast like this 80 years ago, right? Now, it's normal.
Right.
It's almost anticipated.
Mm-hmm.
Expected. Yeah.
Yeah.
What has really changed? Not much. I mean, there's not much difference between the 1920 version of me and the 1920 version of you.
Do our values change? Like societal values, those change over time.
Those change
right?
over time. Yes, I agree. They're just collected. In my opinion, they're an aggregate of individual values.
You think it's fair to say that we all live in a world of our own making?
I think that's very fair to say.
Values would play a critical role in
They
that,
do.
right? And they're going to shape our quality of life.
Mm-hmm.
Yet we just uncovered that maybe they're inherently, misguided.
Okay. I'm not saying they're misguided. I'm saying they're inherently misguided.
Yeah.
I just think there's an applicability that we may not be evaluating. And I do think it's everyone's responsibility to evaluate the applicability of a particular value in their time.
Right. Its impact on their life.
Yes.
And ironically, so they're going to be evaluating the applicability of the value on their life, and in hopes that this value will improve their quality of life.
Yes.
However, quality of life is inherently value dependent, right? You have to have a value judgment take place to understand what a high and low quality of life is. What's
Right.
good and bad there. It's just causing. I feel like it begs the question. What about this hypothetical person with no values and no direction? They are purely an observer of their environment. They're no longer evaluating.
Ooh, wait. We threw a word in there.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, please.
We attach direction to values.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to say maybe let's not do that, right?
Explain a little bit more.
So just because someone doesn't have values doesn't mean that or just because someone can't find their values or haven't solidified their values, I don't think it means that they're aimless, right? I don't think that means that they don't have a sense of direction. Or at least I wouldn't observe it or judge it that way.
But how are they moving towards something if there's nothing that's attracting them? Because they don't see value in anything.
Well, I mean, I think they're living in this concept we call time. I mean, we're all moving towards the inevitability, right? So they are inherently moving towards something.
Well, it's really, they're not moving, right? But time is, or time is moving them.
It could be either way.
Yeah.
But my point is they're moving towards non-existence.
How do we know?
Well, I mean, we know that energy continues to transmute, transform until it can no longer take up space. There's no longer a utility for it. Right. So that's what I mean by like non-existence, and not like in some weird, scary way. But what I mean is there's no more utility. So they're moving towards their own lack of utility, right? And so I think, because quite honestly, when we assign value to things, that's the way we do it. We're like, oh, this has utility, therefore its value is this, right? And we do that with people, like they're objects. And we assess and judge people based on the values that they have derived. And so that has utility in and of itself. Like if I see somebody who values, a pretty crappy car, and they're like, man, this is the best thing ever. I mean, observing them and making assessments and judgments about them has some utility in my life. It reinforces my values, right? If I call someone or think of someone as a deplorable character, or a fascist, or a good person, that assessment and judgment alone validates my own values that I have either inherited from someone else, my environment, or derived from my observation of my existence.
It could be perceived as utility to you, but I think it'd be hard to make the case that it actually helps you.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I agree. Like it may not always help a person.
Right.
But remember, utility It's just if I get anything out of it.
It's in the eye of the beholder.
Utility
we decide.
is, yes,
Yeah.
like you said, use the word optimization, right?
Mhm.
Utility, in my opinion, is the attempt to optimize something. You may be getting 5% optimization out of
Mhm.
it, but you are using it in some way.
Right. But it's still, like, the really confusing thing about this whole situation is that at the end of the day, even if we're trying to measure something by its utility, the utility is still a subjective value judgment,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we determine that. So it's all relative.
We determine, I agree, we determine that on an individual basis. That's where the subjective piece comes
Mhm.
in. I think where it becomes sometimes a little dangerous. It can also be, positive, but where we start to aggregate and we start to have groupthink,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, which we know can be very counterproductive. It stifles
Yes.
innovation and growth and expansion, which is one of the themes about this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to just point out, acknowledge, and appreciate how how difficult and challenging it is. One of our main premises of this podcast is that we're trying to discard the pretense of having it all figured out and knowing it all. But it's very tempting. I think it's very human to try to argue a point
Mm-hmm.
and to try to be right, and not necessarily from a sense of ego, but more so from a sense of making sense of the world. We all have a model of
Mhm.
how the world functions, and the degree to which that model is validated by our incoming experiences, I think we feel stability from that. We're like, yeah, the assumptions that I made, they were validated by these events that happened, and now I can rest easy knowing that I feel secure in my foundation of
Mhm.
values and beliefs. But this podcast makes it really hard to do that because when you drill down far enough into something, you realize that it too is a human construct. We
Mhm.
created it. And when I say we, I mean like the collective,
Mhm.
like all people of all time have worked together to create these tools, these social constructs, which, I'm trying to reframe and pivot here and think about now that we've established that values are a little more than human, imaginations, what use do they have? We did make them for a reason,
Yeah.
and I know that, it's like any system or any process. We create it to serve us, and then it serves us until it's
Obsolete.
until it's
Yeah.
obsolete. It has reached the end of its utility.
I agree. Yes. So, check. We use utility. We obsolescence, right? I agree. I think they're meant to optimize our existence. I think, like I was saying earlier, someone, they had an experience, they formulated an opinion, and that opinion became broadly and widely accepted.
Yep.
Right? And so that's why I say most values, if not all of them, are derived in some sense. We're all playing with the same basic periodic table of elements.
Right.
There's nothing really new that's being discovered.
Mhm.
Our conditions and experiences aren't that unique, except for, the advent of technology, whatever that is. But
Tool.
tools, yes.
Mhm.
And then how we deal with those tools, how we acclimate to the new climate that has been created by those tools. So I think, yes, the goal or the good that it does is it optimizes our lives. It optimizes our existence, our relationships,
They can.
our environments. Yes.
Can
Well,
optimize.
yes, that's the
Yeah.
positive.
Yeah.
Positive
Yeah.
thing I'm looking at.
I'm thinking of the social contract, right? And how the critical role that values play in that. you and I have an unconventional friendship, right? And I think that gives us a free pass to do silly things like I got to read your list of personal values. Mm-hmm. And it was so fascinating to me. It really opened up my eyes behind the scenes. What are some of the drivers mm-hmm. of behavior here? But I think the reason that I enjoyed it so much is because it helped me know what to expect from you. Mm-hmm. At the very least, your intention. Not necessarily the result. I have no idea what you're going to say or what you're going to do. But I know that it's likely some permutation of the collective of your values. Yeah. And they're all independent ingredients. And this is a complex system, right? So that means every ingredient is impacting and interacting with other ingredients to form, if we're going to use the metaphor of a recipe, to form new flavors.
Right. Yeah.
That could not have existed in isolation. Mm-hmm. But that is valuable. And, we use this, we do a lot of work with values, professionally. We want to understand the individual's values, mm-hmm. and then we want to measure their alignment with our clients' values. Right. So, we can save years of frustration and disappointment and ineffectiveness just by understanding that this organization is operating with these common values, and this individual is so far outside of that that common area that eventually the new hire, new employee is going to feel like I don't belong here. These aren't my people. They don't get me. I don't get them. So I think that may be one of the critical functions of this. I think values ultimately are a tool, right?
Yeah.
It's a technology.
It is a technology.
Yeah.
I think it is a survival technology.
Mm-hmm.
Who
can you trust?
Yes. In a most simplistic way, who can we trust? How can I read a particular situation or environment to make sure that I have the most basic positive outcome, which is my survival, and then how do I optimize that? How do I sustain that over time? Because quite honestly, relative to time, the values don't really matter that much,
Right. They're the means, not the ends.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, if I have all these values and I'm bringing them into every situation as an entrepreneur, right? And I'm not getting a deal done, I've got to reassess my values.
Right.
Within a certain amount of time, right? Because let's say that, if I'm a trust fund person, right, and I've got a bunch of money, sitting aside and I'm running my business, maybe I can go 20 years without really doing a deal.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
But if I'm not, and I've only got about 6 months of runway, mm-hmm. well, then my values need to evolve a lot quicker, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's the same way, same thing, about any walk of life. I mean, we may have these values, but if they're not allowing us to evolve and adapt when our environment is encouraging us to do so, then I think the values don't really matter as much.
It's fascinating to me how this concept of adherence to values. So I know what your values are, mm-hmm. and I also have the good fortune of being an observer of your life, right? So I can kind of see how you choose to conduct yourself and present yourself to the world and all that good stuff. And even if you do something that maybe I don't value or I don't agree with on the surface, and I feel like this happens very frequently just in human culture. Mm-hmm. Somebody does something and we judge it immediately. We're like, why would you do, we start doubting their competence, right? Mm-hmm. When oftentimes I find it has less to do with competence and more to do with values, right? What's the premise from which they decided to make this decision and take this action? However, if I know your values, and you adhered to your values in your actions, and I'm speaking like hypothetically, but I'm very likely to still trust and respect you because I will respect the fact that you stuck to your values. You were congruent, consistent, stable over time. Stability in human relationships creates safety.
Yeah.
I feel like this is a story that's kind of as old as time. I don't like what you did, but I understand why you did it.
Yeah.
And it seems to me just another way that we're like using social constructs to create safety for ourselves.
Yes. Well, we need to, in a lot of cases, feel safe to create safety, which is very interesting to me. Because
Paradoxical.
It's paradoxical. Yeah. If someone can say, I'm safe, then, we're sustaining safety, but we're not actually creating or initiating safety.
To initiate safety is to what? To add protection? To reduce risk?
I think to initiate safety, you have to actually be in conditions that are unsafe.
Can you expound on that? I like where this is headed. I don't fully understand it yet, but
okay. So you think about I love the Perot. I go to Perot all the time.
Thursdays on tap, or Tuesdays?
Thursdays. Yeah,
on
Thursdays
tap.
on tap. But I sometimes will go to the Perot and work down in the little lobby area.
Yeah.
And then take a break for a couple hours and just go and look at the exhibits. So on one of the floors, they've got how humanoids go back to 4 million years, and there's fossils and bones and all that stuff. But when I think about it, what was feeling safe for them?
It's time dependent
for those
isn't
beings. Feeling safe might have been having a rock to sleep under.
Right. It
right?
could have existed in the span of minutes.
And been
seconds. Oh my gosh, we're safe right now.
Yes, we're
what
safe.
What is this beautiful feeling?
Right. But feeling safe now is having 3 Starbucks coffees a week. If I lose one of them, I'm losing my mind. I'm so afraid. There are people who, maybe sometimes myself included, if I can't see the next month's worth of income, but I've got stuff in my deep freezers and I've got food in my refrigerator, I've got my pantry fully stocked, I still don't feel safe. Right? That's nonsensical to someone.
It is.
Right? Who's never had a salary job or who's not even lived in the U.S. So there are different degrees of safety, but I think all of them, for the most part, we're sustaining safety. We're not really initiating safety. The example of having the next month's salary, compared to having the deep freezer filled and then the pantry filled, let's say that I get to day 29 and then I pull that deal off or whatever happens. Well, then I've initiated safety.
Right.
Because it was impending doom.
Right. The unknown.
The unknown, right.
Yeah.
So, I just think from where we started, it's debatable, right? It could be 4 million years. It could be 40,000 years, whatever.
Yeah.
We were always a lot more safer than what we feel.
Right.
And I don't think most of us actually get to experience that.
To relish that.
Yes.
That I am safe in this moment. Everything is okay. We carry so much anxiety around with us on a daily basis. It's like the backpack that we just can't take off.
Yeah.
It's weighing us down.
Oh, and I will say this, sorry.
No.
In a lot of cases, sustaining safety is about creating gratitude. And I think values help us reinforce gratitude. Because we say like, oh, well, at least I've got this.
Yeah.
Relative to this person or this group of people not having this, which I think is misguided, right? If we take that perspective, I think the perspective
looking down
or looking down, looking
right.
across. I think the perspective we need to always, I try to always have is looking back, right? Like, even if I'm looking at others, how did others do that on the continuum that I'm on?
Yeah.
Right. So what was it like for my grandfather?
Yeah.
He probably couldn't do a podcast with his best friend, right? If his best friend wasn't a black man.
Right. Oh my God.
So I'm like very grateful for that.
Yeah.
Or, same thing, like thinking about like how I can go to Perot and work. Yes, technology has allowed me to do that, but also I'm able to go in there and do my thing. That wasn't the case for my dad, who had 7 kids.
Right.
And just didn't have the space and time to really have the flexibility that I do.
Yeah.
Right? So I just think there's not much of a difference between my dad, my grandfather, in terms of like the men we are. I don't think. And I do not think there's much of a difference in terms of what we value and trying to provide for our families and ourselves.
Yeah.
But I do think there is a difference in the conditions. And if I'm referencing anyone or anything that's not on the same continuum, I think that's misguided.
Yeah.
And then if I can broaden that out and look at it at a human perspective, right? So, man, I get to like have AC majority of my life.
Right. Such comfort.
Right.
Oh my.
Right. And I'm around here complaining about things. Or I get to get in a jet and get somewhere in 2 hours. But I'm complaining. Oh, and I don't die along the way. Or like a third of the passengers don't die along the way.
Yeah.
And I'm complaining because, I flew Spirit. Like,
right.
it doesn't. So what I'm saying is like, we create these values to make us feel better, in a lot of cases, or feel safer.
Yeah.
When I don't think it's really necessary if we're looking back for perspective.
Right. Which is such a powerful point of view.
Yeah.
I like that frame of reference so much better. It feels just less egoic to consider people who lived in a different time. It's like, I love how you talk about, you like to read the works of dead people.
I do.
Because the story's told and it's done and it's not likely to change,
It's not likely to change.
There might be some posthumous research that's done that like uncovers that this person, this or that. But for the most part, like when we subscribe to a living celebrity or thought leader or something, that sometimes they do things that are absolutely devastating, and then it's like this little piece of our identity. What do we do with it? But yeah, no, I think you said that so beautifully. I love it, and I want to reciprocate by sharing one. So one of my values, one of like my I go back and forth on this. When I have days where I wake up in a state, a fit of ingratitude, where, and I suspect that this is a universal experience, but I don't really ask people about it, because frankly, I try to avoid it. I don't really like it. I don't enjoy the state, but every once in a while I will wake up and it's kind of like just this dissatisfied, feeling of like, am I, and I think the operative word here is should be progressing faster, or this should have happened a certain way, which is useless, right?
It is.
I mean, it's totally useless.
It may even be maladaptive.
I think it is.
Yeah.
Because it's dedicating and focusing energy on something that has little to no utility, right? So how could it not be counterproductive? But I found this kind of mechanism for getting myself back on track is like, all right, if there are these 4 categories in my life that I know when it really boils down to it at this day and time, in this present moment, these are the things that really fill me up. They stoke my internal fire.
Mm-hmm.
And, number 1 is like loving relationships. Do I have people that I love deeply and fully, and do I suspect that I have that in return, right?
Right.
And the answer to that question is oftentimes yes, right? And that's a huge source of gratitude. Am I growing? When I look back, when I look at myself, a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, do I feel as though I have sustained meaningful inner growth?
Mm-hmm.
And to me that really looks like it plays out in a lot of different ways, but a lot of it boils down to this sense of peace. I think that's probably the perfect word for it. It's like this internal congruence and alignment and symmetry. And then next to my health, like from an integral perspective, what, spiritual, physical, mental, I think I left one out. There's usually a 4th that goes emotional. Yeah, maybe. But if that is that in a decent place? Like I'm not dying.
Right.
Right. I feel all right. I feel pretty good. I feel good about like the things that I'm consuming. And then last but not least, contribution. Do I feel as though I'm making a meaningful contribution? And this is totally subjective. This is my opinion. People, and I'm sure there are many people in the world that look at my work and they're like, that's of no value to society. But I feel like it has value to society. I got off a call last night with, I want to say one of my favorite candidates. I really have this habit of, developing this like unconditional positive regard for the candidates that I place inside our client firms. It's like you get to know them on such a deep level. It requires a lot of vulnerability on the part of the candidate, and I find that the only way to initiate that is for me to be vulnerable, right? Kind of like
reciprocation.
It's like the hey, this is a safe space.
Mm-hmm.
So I had that call last night, and it was just like it's cool because it's gratitude from a leader that I really admire. Like I look up to. I really hope to one day say that I have done some of these, incredible things in my career like he's done in his. And so to hear him validate that work and say like this position fits me like a glove, and I am I'm so grateful to be in it and to be surrounded by this community of people that like this is my tribe. It's like, boom, I really feel like I'm contributing something meaningful to society. In the final analysis, what will the results say? I don't know, but it's really none of my business. What more can I do but do the best that I can with the resources that I have? And I think those are probably the values, and what I have been calling my personal values are more like tools. And the reason for this entire 10-minute monologue that I'm just wrapping up now is that the first one is presence.
Yes.
I strongly suspect that presence is the limiting nutrient that allows human life to flourish and blossom, come into full bloom, which is like kind of the realization of potential, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when we lose presence, we start getting caught up in the shoulds and the coulds and the comparison. And I just don't think that we face those same challenges whenever we are in a present state. Like right now, we have no idea what is going on in the outside world. There could be riots out there.
Right.
There could be all kinds of violence and aggression. But you and I, like in this moment, we're safe.
We're safe. We're under the rock. Even if it's for a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
Right? We're under the shelter.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, one of the first challenges we had to face with respect to safety. and then determining value.
Yeah. But it's also like we have to leave the shelter of the rock, right? We have to go get food. We have to expose ourselves to the world. And that is the magical thing about presence to me, is that even when we are in great danger, if you're still alive and you can afford the brain cycles to think the thought, you know, and whether that thought is like, I'm safe or I'm afraid or I'm in imminent danger, in this moment, you are safe. And like, we have an opportunity to cherish that, to experience gratitude for it. Granted, like, if you're, you know, hanging from a little tree branch off the side of a cliff, maybe not the best time to bust out your gratitude journal and start.
Well, then you need to initiate safety.
Yeah, it's time to initiate safety at that point. But you could do that in gratitude.
Right. No, I agree. I think it does provide us with an opportunity to start to live in possibility. You know, there are transitions, right, in safety, in sustaining safety. So, like you said, you're going to have to go out and get food.
Yeah.
Well, you know, people went out and got enough food where then they were able to start farming. Right. So, I mean, you got it. And I think that's the key, where you can then start to innovate. You can start to modify. You can then start to think about, you know, like you said, one of your values, contribution. Not only am I contributing to, you know, my own well-being, but I'm contributing to the well-being of others that I can see. And then it's contributing to the well-being of others that I can't even see.
Right.
Right.
There's a chain reaction there.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I don't think it happens without, to your point, the element of safety. And so if values just get us to that point alone, they're worth it.
Right.
Right. You know, I'm not, but in no way am I demeaning values or the importance of values.
We've just taken an objective look at them.
Right.
Today.
Just an objective look. Yeah. So, I mean, I think they're very important. I'm going to look at maybe you did four or five.
I did like when I'm feeling bad and I need to take inventory of my life and kind of like, it's like the pillars supporting my existence. Do they have cracks in them? Do they need to be repaired? And if those pillars are sustained, then it's like, you know, maybe I was making something out of nothing here. Actually, my life is pretty good.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's the point I was driving at, is that have something to inspect. You know, and make it deeply relevant and salient to you. It doesn't really have to matter to anybody else. Other people might not care at all about inner growth or meaningful contribution. There are a lot of people in the world that don't care about having connected, loving relationships. That's apparent, right? In our society. Yeah. And for them, it wouldn't be a good variable.
No.
But for me, it definitely resonates with me. I don't want to. Last thing I want to do is put you on the spot, but I definitely want to hear about, you know, any values, and if there are any pillars that you look to when you're trying to take inventory. And I just love throwing you on the spot, by the way. It's just like every single podcast.
Yeah, every single episode. Like, hey man, let's talk about this. Ready, go. So yeah, what I've done is I've got 12. Yeah.
Oh, did you take 2? I swear it was 14.
Yes.
The one that
I knocked them down.
Condensed.
Condensed. And then I grouped them in 3.
Really?
So I've got 4 sets of 3. It's 12, yeah.
Good mental math there. Check.
So yeah, what the first one is self, right? So when I'm looking at self, I'm trying to basically understand the never-ending process of how I will become the person that I ultimately end up being, right? When it's all said and done. And I'm not sure that can't happen without these three values. So childlike curiosity, duality, and then introspection. Right?
Question,
Yeah.
really quick. So self, is this, and I'm trying to clarify for our listeners, right? Is this like a vision of who you will be, or is this more so just a possibility of what you may be?
Well, I think
Maybe
possibly. Yeah, I'm not intransigent on who I will become. Like I have no earthly idea. But it is the never-ending process of how we become who we want to be by how we behave in the critical situations of our life, right? So that's the way I'm characterizing it. And like I said, I don't think I can get there unless I exhibit the values of childlike curiosity, duality, and introspection.
I think that there may be a lot of people interested in what you mean by duality, because I remember asking you that the first time you told me about these also.
Yeah, I think the way I characterize duality is I'm trusting my intuition, but I'm also verifying my presumptions. There are some things that are intuitively derived. They're just, my instincts, my desires that are going to draw me towards things. And then there's other things that are presumptions, right? So, when I think about the presumptions, typically they will be avoidant of it. We're afraid of some particular circumstance, or and so I want to challenge that, right? I want to trust my intuition, but also challenge, because when it comes to intuition and instinct, sometimes we deny ourselves.
Oh yeah,
right,
all the time.
So leaning into those things, but also challenging them as well. So that takes a duality.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah,
it's recognizing that these are could be conceived of as opposite ends of a continuum, and yet they are both inherently valuable, meaningful, if you can leverage them both.
Yes.
But it seems like most people tend to, they either really lean on instincts or they're like totally data driven,
Right.
Whatever.
Yeah, leaning into their presumptions or assumptions about whatever it is that they're looking at. So yeah, want to challenge those things and challenge my environment as well. I think that's another aspect of duality, being in an environment but also observing it.
Absolutely.
So I'd say the second group, I'll just try to get through these real quick.
Can I convince you to share more?
Leadership, right? So it's the prudent management of relationships. And I don't think that I could get there without equanimity, being a non-binary thinker, and then perspective.
Man, what to dig into here. So I love all three of these.
It's going to grill me.
I feel like, non-binary thinking is maybe the most foreign to most people. What was the third one? Equanimity, non-binary thinking, and
perspective.
Perspective. Yeah. So we talk a lot about perspective. Are you cool with digging into non-binary thinking?
Yeah. So like I mentioned earlier, there's one thing to be in an environment, and then there's a whole other thing to be able to observe that environment. So, I'm dedicated to observing the interdependencies between the paradoxical features of our existence as individuals in that environment and the overall entity that is that environment. Those paradoxical features are going to be in any environment if you look hard enough.
Right.
There are going to be things that you're like, that's in paradox.
Sense. Yeah.
So I think that's what I mean by being a non-binary thinker. There's not just one mode. You're not looking at one aspect of the paradox.
Right.
And living by it, but you're observing them both and seeing how they're interdependent.
Which I feel like is related to perspective, but the interdependence is, I don't know. Can you contrast that with perspective?
I think perspective is where you're able to get that bird's eye view, and you're able to kind of look at the entire tapestry and the connectivity.
I see.
So imagine if, so the DART, right, the Dallas Area Rapid Transit.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, look at that. It's the longest, or at least it maybe it was for a while, and maybe something has eclipsed that, but it was known as the longest contiguous light rail in the United States.
Wow.
The problem is that the connectivity, the horizontal connectivity, wasn't really as robust as it needed to be for it to be, a proficient system.
Right, really useful to most Dallasites.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or what was our word? Optimal, right?
Yeah.
So I think perspective is where you can rise above it, right, and see the horizontal, the spokes, right,
Right.
the connectivity.
Yeah.
And I think being a non-binary thinker is where you can see the east-west trains, right? Or
Right.
you can see the north-south trains, both of them, and you can hop on one and hop on the other,
Yeah.
right, if you need to. So that's kind of my example. I don't know if that.
It helps a lot. It almost makes me think it's like a more intimate relationship with the poles of any situation. Whereas perspective is really, it's detached.
It's the whole picture.
Yeah,
because
it's
you're
the whole
detached.
picture.
Yeah, you can see where bus number 1 connects with Blue Line,
Yeah.
east and west, or you can see bus 252. You can see it all. You can see it all working, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's what perspective is, with respect to the prudent management of relationships, which is leadership.
Yeah.
Right? So
Leadership bucket.
okay, 3, 4. All right, one question on these. So innovation, right, which is a creative and courageous nature. So I don't think that we can have a creative and courageous nature without the values or qualities of fearlessness, truth, and rationality.
I'm going to dig into fearlessness.
All right.
Yeah, I feel like that's what really piques my interest.
Okay. Well, how I describe it is engendering the ability to acknowledge, honor, and accept the presence of fear without allowing it to become a hindrance or obstacle. And that makes us free from fear. And so we rise above it, any thought that is grounded in fear.
I have so much respect for that frame of reference. It reminds me, I don't know if you've ever heard of this solving the problem versus solving the premise, which is like the idea that, you could try to conquer fear, right? You could do every single thing that makes you feel fearful, and you'll likely find, right, that fear diminishes over time. Things aren't quite as scary as we make them out to be in our mind. And that's solving the problem, but the premise is having a problem with fear itself, being disturbed by the very act of feeling fear, which is a very natural human emotion, So I think anytime that we demonize a central aspect of human behavior, no matter how faulty or counterproductive or maladaptive it might be, we know fear makes people do things that they spend the rest of their lives regretting.
Yeah. I love one word in there when I'm describing fearlessness, which is honor, right? So acknowledge, honor, and accept the presence of fear.
Right.
I think, to your point, fear deserves a reverence in some way.
Yeah.
It is a core emotion that if it is not dealt with properly, if it's not given its respect, its honor.
I was literally thinking respect as well. Yeah.
Then we can behave in ways that are maladaptive and ineffective. So I agree. That's why I started, use it that way. All right, 4. integration, so harmonious unity. And I don't think I can achieve this with myself or with respect to any environment that I'm involved with without self-acceptance, courage, and compassion.
Man, those are like three of my favorite things in the world. But can we pick on self-acceptance a bit?
Sure. All right. So acceptance isn't passive. It's the first step in an active process towards self-improvement. When we seek to understand the humanity within ourselves, we will seek to understand the humanity in our environments.
So, ironically, acceptance is, I probably should have shared all these earlier so that, you didn't think I was just copying you, but
It's okay. We
acceptance
spend a lot
is-
of time together.
Yeah. Now, acceptance is one of those 5 values that they're like the values of my business, but the more that I reflect on them, the more I see them as tools, and I think, they're presence, understanding, acceptance, love, and transformation. And they're all far-reaching. I feel like I could talk at length about any of them and why they feel so critical to living a high quality of life, at least what I define as a high quality of life. And I think acceptance is one of those that's like internal and external. I think that the feeling of somebody wanting you to be something that you're not. Oh my gosh, how uncomfortable is that? And I think that, we characterize hate or hatefulness as the most hurtful thing that you can do to another human being. But I would present the idea that perhaps wishing for somebody to be something other than what they truly are might be it's at least more pernicious. It's very subtle and debilitating over time. But I think it might be even more hurtful. And we do this under the guise of love. We say think of the parent-child dynamic. I love you, and that's why I want you to be great. You need to be an attorney. You need to be a doctor. You need to fit into my mold of what success looks like so that you'll be safe and you'll be protected.
That creates values. Like it creates a value chain in that person.
It does. It's a vacuum, honestly,
is,
in the mind. And then, that just gets filled with all this junk, all this garbage that we then have to sort and sift through and parse out, what's meaningful and what's not. But I say that to say that, I think the feeling of being truly accepted by someone for who you are with no conditions whatsoever, I think that is one of the most loving acts, at least that's been my experience. So in order to give that, which is the sincere desire in my heart, I have to be able to receive it, right? I have to receive it from myself. I have to give it to myself and receive it, which is this concept of self-acceptance, that perhaps it's possible that I am exactly as I am supposed to be in this moment. And this moment in time is just a snapshot of the journey of my greater evolution and purpose-making, meaning-making throughout the course of my life. And once I'm able to do that, to varying degrees of success, right? I definitely fall short some days, and I berate myself, and I'm critical, and, all those things. But when I am doing it well, and I can feel that sense of self-love and self-acceptance, it becomes so much easier to offer that to others. And I think that is, along with presence, one of those limiting nutrients in the human life that without it we wither. And it's a constraint to our growth and development. And when we have a constraint on our growth and development, I think it naturally becomes a constraint on our contribution. And I'm, of course, relating these to the things that are important to me. But if we're not nourished and we can't reach our full potential, our highest contribution comes from our full potential. I mean, I think that's a fairly logical rational argument.
But it's leaning into and I said this earlier, I'm uncertain of what or who or what I will become,
Yeah.
right? I think that's ultimately what self-acceptance
Oh,
is.
yeah.
It's leaning into the uncertainty of what will happen with you. Like, you don't know. And if I don't know who I ultimately will become, then I don't know who others will become.
Right.
And so for me to, one, if I am intransigently placing some standard on someone else and saying this is who they should be, or this is how this entity or this environment should behave relative to time, which I don't know, I am so uncertain of, then what am I doing to myself?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
What a valid question that we might all benefit from asking ourselves a little bit more. What am I doing to myself? And we can see, I think, our relationships, they're a reflection, right,
Mhm.
of our internal relationship. So if it's happening here, it's likely happening there. And once you become aware of it, bring it into consciousness, that's kind of like a proxy for accountability, right? Then you have the power to influence it,
Yeah.
to change it.
Realize your agency.
Yeah.
And if I'm if I'm uncertain about who I will become, then that means that every second I can change and alter myself.
Yeah.
But if I'm certain about who I will become, then that means there's nothing that can be done.
Yeah, there's no flexibility. It's rigid.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Which is a constraint.
which is a constraint. And it's BS. Like,
Yeah.
to live that way, because one, it's untrue. There's so many examples of where that's not the case. That's why I love reading about people who have already, died, because you get to see like the twists and turns of their life. You get to see, how they ended up here, and you would have never guessed that would have been the case. And so if that's happening with them, then it's probably going to happen with me.
Yeah.
Like-
It's definitely within the realm of possibility. I was watching a Nikola Tesla documentary last night, and it's endlessly fascinating to me how you can have all of the ingredients for greatness like Tesla did, but right, he kind of died impoverished, and with lacking this crowning achievement that he was working towards, his entire life. And I mean, of course, he accomplished so much, right? That's why we know his name, and he's in all the books, and we talk about him today.
He still achieved greatness.
Yeah, he did. He did. Just
not in a monetary sense.
Yeah, not in a monetary sense, and perhaps not in the way that we would, like in hindsight. Now we say, oh my gosh, it was a great success. But in the context of his lifetime, like what did his parents think? What did his friends think? I don't know if he had kids, but if he did, what did the young people think?
Yeah,
Tesla?
well, let's pull up the documentaries that they're referenced on. Oh, wait, they're not.
Right.
Because they didn't achieve the greatness that would allow them to transcend time. Their opinions to transcend time. His did. Right? So that, I think that's kind of the key, is like what people think about us. It may not matter over time.
Well, I mean, I think we put so much value on it, right? Most people put so much value on it. But whenever we examine it and start looking into and thinking about, well, why does it matter? It's really hard to come up with a compelling answer, I think. I've yet to find one.
Yeah.
Right? And I see a lot more negative implications than positive ones. So I know it's time for us to wrap up, close up this podcast. And I just want to thank you for sharing your values.
Yeah.
I feel like that it's such a treat. It requires both strength and vulnerability.
Same to
that.
you.
Thank you.
I'm happy to be laid bare. my values.
Our like audio only listeners are going to be like, are they?
No.
Are they? No. We're fully clothed.
We're fully
it's all
clothed.
good. Okay, thanks
It's
everybody.
married, guys.
Yeah, I am. It's official. Thanks
All
for
right.
tuning in today. We appreciate y'all.
The Enzo Project is brought to you by Bolt Human Capital and Noon Holdings. Edited by ELE. You can find the Enzo Project on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Music, the song Full Bloom by Jewel and Nuamina. You can find them wherever you listen to your music.